Hi guys, happy Friday. You finished another week. This was our last week of learning, pretty much tough stuff. Next week will be all fun stuff. I am going to continue on with the one and only Ivan today. Just like Mr. Lowers, I do not have a Padlet question set up, so I might ask you to stop and pause the video and think for a second, or turn and talk to not a friend, but a sibling or parent, stuffed animal, pet, anyone around you, instead of responding to a Padlet. If you have the book, I am starting on page 209 where it says puzzle pieces at the top. And if you are following along on the PDF version, I'm starting on page 110. And it also says puzzle pieces at the top. Let's go ahead and get started. Puzzle pieces. After a long while, I grow quiet. I sit. It's hard work being angry. Julia looks at me with wide, disbelieving eyes. I'm panting. I'm a little out of shape. What the heck was that? George demands. Something's really wrong, Julia says. I've never seen Ivan act this way. He seems to be calming down. Thank goodness, George says. Julia shakes her head. He's still upset, Dad. Look at his eyes. My pictures are scattered all over the floor like huge autumn leaves. What a mess, George says, sighing. Wish I hadn't bothered sweeping tonight. Do you think Ivan's okay? Julia asks. Probably just a temper tantrum, George says. He reaches under a chair to retrieve a brown and red picture. Can't say I blame the guy, stuck in that tiny cage all these years. Julia starts to answer, but then she freezes. She cocks her head. She stares at her feet where my pictures lie in disarray. Dad, she whispers, come see this. I'm sure he's another Rembrandt, George says. Let's pick these up and get going, Jules. I'm exhausted. Dad, she says again, seriously, look at this. George follows her gaze. I see blobs. Many, many blobs, along with the occasional swirl. Please, can we go home now? That's an H, Dad. Julia kneels down, straightening one picture, then another. That's an H. And here, she grabs more pictures. This one here, and I don't know, maybe that one. You have an E? George rubs his eyes. I hold my breath. Julia is running now. She picks up one of the pictures, sets down another. It's like a puzzle, Dad. This is something. It's a word. Maybe words. And a picture of something. A giant picture. George says, this is crazy. But he's looking at the floor too, wandering from picture to picture and scratching his head. H, Julia says. E. O. Ho? Julia chews her lower lip. H-E-O. And that looks a lot like an I. H-E-O-I. George writes in the air with his finger. I-E-O-H. Not the letters, an actual I. And that's a foot. Or maybe a tree. And a trunk. Dad, I think that's a trunk. Julia runs to my window. Ivan, she whispers, what did you make? I stare back. I cross my arms. This is taking much longer than I thought it would. Humans. Sometimes they make chimps look smart. Finally, Julia and George take the pictures to the ring where there's room to see them all. An hour passes as they try to assemble my puzzle. Ruby's awake now, and she and Bob and I watch. Ivan, Ruby says, is that a picture of me? Yes, I say proudly. Where am I supposed to be? That's a zoo, Ruby. See the walls and the grass and the people looking at you? Ruby squints. Who are all of those elephants? You haven't met them, I say. Yet. It's a very nice zoo, Ruby says with an approving nod. Bob nudges me with his cold nose. It is indeed. In the ring, Julia pumps her fist in the air. Yes, she cries. I told you, Dad. There it is. Home. Home. George gazes at the letters. He spins around to look at me. Maybe it's just a coincidence, Jules. You know, a once in a trillion kind of thing. Like that old saying about the chimp and the typewriter. Give him long enough and he'll write a novel. I make a grumbling noise, as if a chimp could write a letter, let alone a book. Then how do you explain the rest of it? Julia demands. The picture of Ruby in the zoo? How do you know it's a zoo? George asks. See the circle on the gate? There's a red giraffe in it. George squints and tilts his head. Are you sure that's a giraffe? I was thinking more along the lines of a deformed cat. It's the logo for the zoo, Dad. It's on all of their signs. Explain that. George gives her a helpless smile. I can't begin to. I'm just saying there has to be a logical explanation. Look how big it is. Julia puts the last piece of Ruby's ear into place. It's huge. It is definitely large, George agrees. Julia watches me. She chews on her thumbnail. I see the question in her eyes. She turns back to the paintings and stares at them, truly looking. A slow smile dawns on Julia's face. Dad, she says, I have an idea. A big idea. Julia races around the edge of my paintings, her arms spread wide. Billboard big. I'm not following you. I think this is meant to be on a billboard. That's what Ivan wants. George crosses his arms over his chest. What Ivan wants? He repeats slowly. And you know this because you two have been chatting? Because I'm an artist and he's an artist. Uh-huh, says George. Julia clasps her hands together. Come on, Dad, I'm begging you. George shakes his head. No, I'm not doing that. No billboard. No way. I'll get the ladder, Julia says. You get the glue. I know it's dark out, but the billboard's lit. Mac will fire me, Jules. Julia considers. But think of the publicity, Dad. Everyone would know about Ruby. Oops. You want me to put a sign up that shows Ruby in a zoo with the word home on it in giant letters? George gestures towards my picture. A sign, incidentally, that just happens to be made by a gorilla? Exactly. And you want me to do it without Mac's permission? George asks. Exactly. No, George says. No way. Julia goes to the edge of the ring, careful not to step on any of my paintings. She picks up Mac's claw stick. She walks back and hands it to her father. George runs a finger along the blade. She's just a baby, Dad. Don't you want to help her? But how would it help, Jules? Even if lots of people see Ivan's sign, it doesn't mean anything's going to change. I'm not exactly sure yet, Julia shakes her head. Maybe people will see the sign and they'll know this isn't where Ruby belongs. Maybe they'll want to help too. George sighs. He looks at Ruby. She waves her trunk. It's a matter of principle, Dad. Principal. Principle. L-E, George corrects. Dad, Julia says softly, what if Ruby ends up like Stella? George looks at me, at Ruby, at Julia. He drops the claw stick. The ladder, he says quietly, is in the storage locker. The next morning, I watch Mac's car slam to a halt in the parking lot. He leaps out. He stares at the billboard. His jaw is open. He doesn't move for a long time. Mad human. A mad gorilla is loud, but a mad human can be loud too, especially when he is throwing chairs and turning over tables and breaking the cotton candy machine. I just want to stop for a second and I want you to think. You can either pause the video and respond to somebody around you, or you can just take a second and think. What Julia was asking her dad to do was kind of crazy. If you were George, what would you do? Would you take those paintings and put them on the billboard and risk losing your job? Would you not do it? Would you try and help in a different way? What would you do? Phone call. Mac is kicking a trash can across the food court when the phone rings. He answers it, red-faced and sweating. "What the?" he demands. He glares at me. "I don't know what you're," he starts saying, but then he stops to listen. "Who?" "Julia who?" he asks. "Oh, sure, George's kid. She's the one who called you?" More talking, with the phone to his ear. Matt comes closer to my cage, eyeing me suspiciously. Yeah, he says. He paints, sure. We've been selling his art for quite a while now." There's another long pause. "Yeah, absolutely. It was my idea." Mac nods. A smile starts at the corners of his mouth. "Photos? No problem. You want to see him in action? Come on down. Have a look. We're open 365 days a year. Can't miss us. We're right off I-95. Mac picks up the overturned trash can. "Yeah, I think he'll be adding more pictures. It's a, what do you call it? Work in progress?" When the call is done, Mac shakes his head. "Impossible," he says. An hour later, a man with a camera comes to take my picture. He's from the local paper, the one Julia called. "How about you take one of me with the elephant?" Mac suggests. He drapes his arm around Ruby's back, grinning as the camera clicks. "Perfect," the man says. "Perfect," Mac agrees. Here's a little picture. A star again. A photo of my billboard is in the newspaper. Mac tapes the story onto my window. Each day, more curious people arrive. They park in front of the billboard. They point and shake their heads. They take photos. Then they come into the mall and buy my paintings. While the visitors watch, I dip my hand in a fresh bucket of paint. I make pictures for the gift shop and pictures to add to the billboard. Trees with birds, a newborn elephant with glittering black eyes, a squirrel, a blue bird, a worm. I even paint Bob so he can be on the billboard too. I can tell he likes pictures, although he says I didn't quite capture his distinguished nose. Every afternoon, Mac and George add my new pictures to the billboard. People slow their cars while they work. Drivers honk and wave. My gift shop pictures now cost $65 with frame. The Ape Artist. I have new names. People call me the Ape Artist, the Primate Picasso. I have visitors from morning till night, and so does Ruby, but nothing's changed for her. Every day at 2, 4, and 7, Ruby plods through the sawdust with Snickers on her back. Every night she has bad dreams. "Bob," I say, after I soothe Ruby to sleep with a story, "my idea isn't working." Bob opens up one eye. "Be patient." "I'm tired of being patient," I say. Interview. This evening, a man and a woman come to interview Mac and also George and Julia. The man has a large and heavy camera perched on his shoulder. He films me as I make my pictures. He films Ruby in her cage with a foot roped to the bolt in the floor. "Mind if I take a look around?" he asks. Mac waves a hand. "Be my guest." While Mac and that woman talk, the cameraman walks through the mall. He pans with his camera right and left, up and down. His eyes fall on the claw stick. He stops. He trains his camera on the gleaming blade. Then he moves on.